My husband was in the shower when his phone lit up on the vanity. A text from C read last night meant everything to me. I did not cry. I picked up his phone and typed a 5-word reply. Come over. She is gone. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and standing on my porch was the last person I ever expected to see. If you have ever been pushed to the edge by those who should protect you, stick around. Let me know where you are watching from and subscribe. You will want to hear how I dismantled their perfect world. My name is Nia, and I am 32 years old. For years, my affluent African-American family in Atlanta treated me like a stain on their curated country club image. I was the disappointment because I dropped out of Spelman College to do what my parents called freelance consulting. They did not know my consulting was actually building a private equity empire. I let them believe I was struggling because their love was exhausting. But nothing prepared me for that Tuesday evening. Marcus, my husband of 4 years, was showering in our modern Buckhead mansion. He loved parading this house to his tech startup friends, claiming it was the fruit of his grueling labor. I let him have that illusion. When his phone illuminated the dark bedroom, I walked over to plug it in. The notification from C stopped me cold. Last night meant everything to me. My hands did not shake as I unlocked his phone. Come over, she is gone. I hit send, deleted the thread immediately, and set the phone down exactly where he left it. I walked downstairs, poured a glass of bourbon, and waited. Exactly 22 minutes later, the doorbell chimed. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer and swung the door open, expecting a random woman from his office. Instead, I stared straight into the pale blue eyes of Chloe. Chloe is 30 years old, white, and married to my older brother Jamal. Jamal is the golden child real estate developer who can do no wrong. Chloe is his perfect trophy wife, a corporate vice president my parents constantly held up as the gold standard of what a woman should be. She did not gasp or try to cover her face. She stood on my welcome mat, wearing a designer trench coat and a smug smile that made my blood boil. "Oh, Nia," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You are still here." She pushed past me into the foyer, tossing her keys onto the console table. Before I could process her audacity, footsteps echoed on the hardwood stairs. Marcus came down wearing only his sweatpants. He froze, seeing me next to Chloe. Panic flashed in his eyes for a fraction of a second, but seeing her confident smirk, his demeanor shifted. He puffed out his chest and walked down to stand right beside my brother's wife. I waited for apologies or frantic backpedaling. None came. Marcus crossed his arms, looking at me with absolute contempt. "We were going to tell you tomorrow," he said unapologetically. "But let us just rip the bandage off. I am in love with Chloe. She actually understands what it takes to build an empire." I looked from my husband to my sister-in-law, wrapping my mind around the betrayal. Chloe stepped closer, wrapping her arm around his waist. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be, Nia," she said condescendingly. "Marcus is a CEO now. He needs a partner who matches his ambition. I am a vice president at a major firm. I know how to navigate the elite circles in Atlanta. You dropped out of Spelman to run some freelance hustle. You do not go to the country club dinners anymore. You do not fit his image, Nia. You do not fit into this family image either." Marcus nodded, a cruel sneer forming on his face. "Look at you, Nia. You have contributed nothing to this marriage. I built my tech startup from the ground up. I bought this massive house. I earned my seat at the table. Chloe fits my image as a successful CEO. You just drag me down. It is over. Pack your bags tonight. I want you out by morning. This house is in my name, and you are not getting a single dime of my tech startup money." Their arrogance was blinding. They thought they had cornered a helpless, financially dependent woman. They expected me to fall to my knees and beg. I did not shed a single tear or raise my voice. I simply picked up my bourbon, took a slow, deliberate sip, and smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that made Marcus step backward. I set the glass down, grabbed my car keys, and walked toward the door. "You are making a huge mistake, Marcus," I said, dangerously quiet, "but it is yours to make." I walked into the cool evening air, leaving them triumphant in the foyer. I slid into my car looking at the grand facade of the mansion through my windshield. Marcus told me to pack my bags because he thought the house was in his name. He did not know I legally transferred the deed to my blind trust 2 years ago, when I first caught him making those absolutely terrible financial decisions. He was just a foolish tenant living in my property on a fake forged lease I let him sign to satisfy his massive ego. And that brilliant tech startup he was so proud of building from the ground up. He had no idea I was his anonymous lead angel investor owning exactly 80% of his precious company. He thought he was throwing away a completely useless college dropout. He did not realize he had just handed his entire existence over to the very powerful woman who truly controlled his destiny. The drive to the Oak Creek Country Club took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like stepping into an entirely different dimension. This was my parents' territory. Reginald and Vivian Adams practically ruled the local chapter of the Jack and Jill elite. They had spent their entire lives curating a flawless image of Black excellence, polishing their legacy until it blinded anyone who looked too closely. I handed my keys to the valet and walked straight past the grand mahogany reception desk, ignoring the manager who scrambled to check the exclusive reservation list. I knew exactly where to find them. They were seated in the private VIP alcove, celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary under a massive crystal chandelier. My father wore a bespoke tuxedo, looking every bit the distinguished patriarch of our prestigious family. My mother sat directly across from him, draped in expensive pearls and casually sipping a vintage Pinot Noir. They looked like a glossy magazine cover depicting generational wealth and untouchable status. I absolutely shattered that pristine image the moment I slammed my phone face up onto the center of their table, right next to their imported caviar. The bright screen displayed a crystal-clear freeze frame pulled directly from my hallway security camera. It showed Marcus and Chloe locked in a passionate embrace, her hands tangled in his hair. I stood there waiting for the inevitable shock to hit their faces. I waited for my mother to gasp in horror and for my father to demand a swift, furious explanation. I waited for the righteous indignation that should automatically accompany the discovery that their precious white daughter-in-law was enthusiastically sleeping with my husband. Neither of them even blinked. My father calmly picked up his white linen napkin and deliberately dabbed the corner of his mouth. My mother sighed a long, dramatic sound of pure inconvenience. She did not look at the damning photograph on the screen. Instead, she looked at my outfit silently, judging my lack of formal evening wear in such a prestigious establishment. "Keep your voice down, Nia," my mother snapped, her tone hushed, but laced with absolute venom. "We are in public and people are trying to enjoy their dinners without dealing with your usual antics." I stared at her, letting the sheer absurdity of her reaction wash over me. "You already knew," I stated, my voice deadly calm and razor sharp. "You knew your golden boy son's wife was sleeping with my husband." My mother took another slow sip of her red wine, swirling the expensive liquid in the glass with practiced elegance. "I knew about it last month. And if you had even a single ounce of sense, you would have kept your mouth shut about it too." "Stop looking so dramatic, Nia. You are making an unnecessary scene. You actively covered up an ongoing affair," I pressed, leaning closer over the pristine table. "You let Chloe sit at our Sunday family dinners acting like the perfect devoted wife to Jamal, while she was regularly crawling into my bed with Marcus." My father finally leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the table. He looked at me not with a shred of paternal sympathy, but with the cold, harsh calculation of a ruthless businessman assessing a sudden liability. "Jamal is drowning right now, Nia," he said bluntly. "His real estate firm is rapidly going under. He completely over-leveraged himself on that massive commercial downtown project, and the banks are circling him like vultures. He desperately needs Marcus to secure a giant commercial loan. Marcus has the tech money and the powerful industry connections. We absolutely need Marcus to remain in this family." "And what about what I need?" I asked, refusing to break eye contact. My mother scoffed, releasing a bitter sound of pure disdain. "Men have needs, Nia. Chloe clearly understands that fact. Chloe knows how to play the country club game to our advantage. She knows how to smile perfectly, host the charity galas, and stroke a fragile man's ego. You were always the difficult, rebellious black woman who refused to conform. You refused to join the prestigious sorority I carefully picked out for you. You dropped out of Spelman to play around with those little freelance consulting projects. You never once wanted to be a cooperative team player. Do not ruin your brother's important legacy over a little insignificant affair. Jamal is the sole heir to this proud family name. He urgently needs this crucial deal to go through without any disruptions. They were ordering me to swallow my dignity completely. They wanted me to let my arrogant husband humiliate me in my own home just so my golden child brother could keep pretending to be a successful real estate mogul. They viewed my entire marriage as nothing more than acceptable collateral damage. You are asking me to stay married to a man who is actively sleeping with your daughter-in-law, I said, clearly summarizing their twisted, insane logic. We are telling you to handle it quietly, my father corrected sharply while signaling the nearest waiter. You will sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will file for a quiet, uncontested divorce in exactly 6 months after Jamal gets his funding. You will quietly walk away and leave Marcus the house. It is the absolute least you can do after bringing so much embarrassment to this family with your career choices. The waiter nervously approached, placing a sleek black leather billfold on the table. My father slid it directly toward me. The printed total was $12,000. Pay this ridiculous bill and sign the divorce papers, my father commanded, his tone dropping low. If you refuse, we will freeze you out of the family trust completely. I stared at him, then reached into my clutch. I slowly pulled out a solid titanium American Express Centurion card and casually tossed it onto the silver tray. Keep the change, I said calmly, walking away. 2 days later, the Buckhead mansion was illuminated like a beacon of stolen triumph. Marcus and Chloe were not just playing house. They were throwing a massive New Beginnings gala. I sat in the back of my black SUV, parked just down the street, watching the valet scramble to park a parade of luxury cars. Marcus had invited all his Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity brothers, the local tech investors, and the Atlanta socialites he always desperately wanted to impress. He was using my house to solidify his fake status as the city's newest elite power player. I watched Chloe greeting guests at the door, wearing a diamond necklace that Marcus definitely bought with the company credit card I secretly monitored. They were serving imported champagne and celebrating their brilliant future built entirely on my dime. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a floor-length emerald green Tom Ford gown that cost more than Marcus made in his first 3 years of business. I stepped out of the SUV flanked by 2 massive private security contractors in crisp, dark suits. We walked straight past the valet, up the meticulously manicured walkway, and through the towering double front doors. The bass from the live jazz band thumped through the floors, but as soon as I stepped into the grand foyer, the music seemed to fade into a dead silence. The laughter stopped, glasses lowered, every single eye in the room locked onto me. Marcus was standing near the grand staircase holding a glass of scotch and laughing loudly with 3 of his fraternity brothers. When he saw me, his fake smile instantly vanished. He set his drink down so hard the crystal nearly shattered against the marble table. Chloe immediately materialized at his side, clutching his arm and putting on a flawless performance of a terrified victim. Marcus marched toward me, closing the distance with aggressive, heavy steps. His fraternity brothers trailed behind him, forming a protective wall of toxic arrogance. Nia, what exactly do you think you are doing? He demanded, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You do not belong here anymore. I told you to pack your bags and leave quietly. Instead, you show up here trying to ruin my night. He turned to the crowd, raising his hands in mock surrender. Listen, everyone, I sincerely apologize. This is my crazy ex-wife. She is having a severe mental breakdown because she simply cannot handle the fact that I moved on to a woman of actual substance. Chloe pressed her face against his shoulder, looking at me with feigned pity. Nia, please, Chloe said softly, making sure the wealthy investors nearby could hear her sweet, innocent tone. You are embarrassing yourself in front of important people. Marcus has outgrown you. He needs a corporate equal, not a college dropout who spends her days pretending to be a consultant. Marcus smirked, encouraged by his new partner in crime. That is exactly right, he said loudly. I carried you for 4 years, Nia. I introduced you to my powerful network. I tried to make you a respectable wife, but you always rejected my fraternity brothers and their educated wives. You never wanted to elevate yourself to our level. You were always too stubborn and too difficult. Now my private security is going to escort you off my property before I call the police and have you publicly removed. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the hysterical black woman stereotype they were so desperately trying to provoke. I just stood there letting the heavy silence amplify their pathetic insecurities. My security guards stepped forward slightly, crossing their arms and creating an impenetrable physical barrier between Marcus and me. The guests began whispering among themselves, sensing that the power dynamic in the room was not what Marcus claimed it was. I slowly opened my silver designer clutch and pulled out a thick, crisp manila folder. I held it out toward him. The entire room of elite guests leaned in collectively, holding their breath. Marcus stared at the folder, refusing to take it. "What is that?" he sneered, stepping back slightly. "A desperate letter begging me to take you back. I am not reading your pathetic apologies, Nia. Get out of my house." I did not withdraw my hand. I stepped 1 inch closer, forcing him to look down at the heavy premium paper. "This is not an apology, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying across the silent room. "It is an immediate notice of eviction. You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises." For a brief second, Marcus looked genuinely confused. Then he threw his head back and let out a loud, booming laugh. His fraternity brothers joined in, chuckling at my supposed delusion. Chloe shook her head, smiling condescendingly as if dealing with a confused child. "You really have lost your mind," Nia, Marcus said, wiping a tear of fake laughter from his eye. "Did you forget how high-end real estate works? I signed the mortgage on this house. My name is on the closing documents. You cannot evict a man from a multi-million-dollar estate he legally owns. You are making a complete fool of yourself in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta." I waited for his laughter to completely die down before I delivered the final devastating blow. I looked directly into his arrogant eyes, watching the false bravado mask a deep underlying terror. "You did not sign a mortgage, Marcus. You signed a long-term lease agreement with Apex Holdings. You were so eager to show off your fake wealth to your friends and secure this address that you never bothered to actually read the final legal documents your broker handed you." I paused, letting the terrifying reality begin to seep into his brain. I am the sole founder and CEO of Apex Holdings. I own this property free and clear. You missed your last 2 rent payments because I secretly froze your tech company bank accounts this morning. Therefore, your lease is officially terminated for non-payment. My security guards stepped forward, simultaneously pulling zip ties from their pockets. "You have 30 minutes to vacate my property, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper that shattered his entire world. "Or you and your new corporate equal will be dragged out of here in handcuffs and arrested for criminal trespassing tonight." The morning after the disastrous New Beginnings party, my older brother Jamal decided to pay me a surprise visit. He did not bother to call ahead. He simply stormed through the heavy revolving glass doors of the massive corporate skyscraper downtown. He strode across the pristine white marble lobby with the aggressive blind entitlement of a man who believed the entire world owed him an apology. He marched directly up to the platinum reception desk and slapped his hand flat against the polished stone surface. He loudly demanded to see Nia Adams. He told the terrified receptionist to point him toward the freelance consulting pool so he could drag his sister away from her little desk and teach her a lesson about family loyalty. The receptionist did not flinch or apologize. She simply pressed a silver button on her earpiece and directed him to the private executive elevator bank. Jamal rode that high-speed elevator all the way to the top floor. He stepped out into a sprawling penthouse suite that occupied the entire 75th floor. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. It was a space designed for absolute corporate power. But Jamal was too blinded by his own toxic rage to actually process the incredible wealth surrounding him. He burst through my solid oak double doors without bothering to knock. I was sitting behind a massive black marble desk, reviewing a quarterly acquisition report. I did not look up when he slammed the heavy door shut behind him. "You have completely lost your mind, Nia," he shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He paced the length of my office, running a shaking hand over his perfectly lined haircut. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, and he was sweating profusely. "You publicly humiliated Marcus in front of the most important tech investors in the city last night. You threatened my wife with private security. You handed my brother-in-law an eviction notice like some kind of unhinged psycho. You are actively destroying our family reputation." I calmly closed my leather-bound folder and interlaced my fingers, resting them on the cool marble. "My reputation is flawless, Jamal," I corrected him smoothly. "You are confusing my reputation with your fragile ego." He slammed both hands down on my desk, leaning over it with the veins popping in his neck. "Marcus promised me $5 million from his next funding round, Nia. $5 million. My commercial real estate firm is drowning. The banks are breathing down my neck. They are threatening to seize my current development sites by Friday if I do not show proof of liquid capital. I needed that tech money. Marcus was supposed to be my savior. And you just threw a massive grenade into the single most important deal of my entire life over a stupid little affair. Men stray, Nia. You should have kept your mouth shut and played your part. You need to call Marcus right now. You need to apologize to Chloe. You need to fix this before my firm entirely collapses." I stared at him, letting the sheer magnitude of his delusion hang in the quiet air of the executive suite. He really expected me to grovel to the woman who slept with my husband just to save his failing business. "You are unbelievable," I said softly. "You are standing in my building begging me to save the woman who actively destroyed my marriage." Jamal sneered, standing up straight and aggressively adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Do not play the victim with me, Nia. You have always been the difficult one. You have always been the problem. You dropped out of Spelman College because you lacked discipline. You lacked vision. You settled for a meaningless freelance hustle while the rest of us actually built something. Mom and Dad took out a second mortgage on their ancestral home just to fund my business. They sacrificed everything they had so I could get my Ivy League degrees from Harvard. They invested in a winner. They invested in my legacy. You are nothing but a useless college dropout who got lucky marrying a successful tech genius. You owe this family your absolute loyalty." He was practically vibrating with rage. He truly believed his own lies. He truly believed his Harvard degree made him invincible. He thought the parents who bankrolled his luxurious life had done him a favor. They had actually turned him into a weak, dependent man who relied on his cheating brother-in-law to save him from absolute financial ruin. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his frantic, sweaty energy. I simply reached out and placed my perfectly manicured hand on the edge of my laptop. "You talk a lot about legacy, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. "You talk a lot about Marcus and his brilliant tech genius. You talk about that $5 million funding round like it is a guaranteed lifeline waiting to pull you out of your massive pile of debt." I slowly turned the laptop monitor around so it faced him directly. The bright screen displayed a live feed of the internal banking dashboard for Marcus and his highly celebrated tech startup. There were 6 different corporate accounts listed on the screen. Jamal leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. His rapid breathing suddenly stopped. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like an absolute ghost in a wrinkled designer suit. Every single account balance displayed a bold red 0. The accounts were entirely empty. A large flashing status bar across the top of the secure banking portal read "Frozen by order of majority shareholder." I watched his eyes dart wildly across the screen, trying to make sense of the devastating reality sitting right in front of him. He looked from the screen to me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. "There is no funding round, Jamal," I stated clearly, letting each word strike him like a physical blow. "I just pulled my capital." My mother summoned me to Maison de l'Elegance the following afternoon. It was the most exclusive luxury boutique in Buckhead, a place where private appointments were strictly required, and vintage champagne flowed freely before you even bothered to look at a price tag. Vivian Adams considered this particular boutique her personal sanctuary. She practically lived here, spending my father's endless wealth to maintain the flawless superficial facade she valued far above the actual well-being of her own children. I found her seated like royalty on a plush tufted velvet sofa in the center of the private VIP fitting room. She was casually sipping a chilled mimosa, while two frantic personal shoppers hovered nearby, carefully arranging a massive rolling rack of the latest European designer gowns. When I walked through the doorway, she waved the attendants away with a sharp, dismissive flick of her wrist. They scurried out immediately, closing the heavy frosted glass doors behind them, leaving us completely alone in the silent, opulent room. Vivian patted the empty space beside her on the velvet sofa, offering a tight, perfectly practiced smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "Sit down, Nia," she said, her voice adopting that sickly sweet melodic tone she always weaponized when she was about to ask for something entirely unreasonable. "We need to talk like adults. We need to make peace and fix this unfortunate misunderstanding before it spirals completely out of our control and damages the family name." I did not sit. I remained standing perfectly still in the center of the room, holding my leather handbag, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to shrink me into a manageable, polite little box. "There is no misunderstanding, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Your daughter-in-law slept with my husband. My brother came to my office and demanded I fund his failing business anyway. I simply removed the toxic financial liabilities from my life." My mother set her crystal champagne flute down hard on the glass table. Her fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hard, furious glare. "You are actively destroying your brother's marriage by aggressively exposing Chloe," she snapped, dropping the peacemaker act completely. "Jamal is completely humiliated. Chloe is currently packing her bags to stay at a luxury hotel because she cannot handle the public shame you selfishly subjected her to last night. You evicted Marcus from his own home. You froze his company bank accounts. You are acting like a vindictive, unhinged woman who cannot see the bigger picture." I stared at her, feeling a profound, chilling sense of detachment. She was actually defending the woman who destroyed my marriage, all to protect Jamal and his fragile ego. She did not care that I was deeply betrayed by the man I loved. She only cared that the betrayal had become inconveniently public and threatened her perfect country club narrative. "Jamal's failing marriage is his own problem," I replied coldly, refusing to give her an inch. "And Marcus was living in my house. He was spending my money to fund his fake lifestyle. I just took my toys and went home." Vivian stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive silk dress. Her eyes narrowed, filled with a venomous, ruthless determination. "You need to stop this ridiculous tantrum right now, Nia. You are going to unfreeze Marcus's accounts immediately. You are going to let him move back into that house today. And then you are going to wire Jamal the $5 million he desperately needs to secure his commercial real estate loan. You will do this because you are an Adams and family loyalty always comes before your bruised pride." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that echoed off the mirrored walls. "You want me to fund the arrogant man who betrayed me just so he can save the golden child brother who actively enables him? You are absolutely delusional if you think I will ever hand over a single penny to either of them." My mother took a slow, deliberate step toward me. Her voice dropped to a low, terrifying whisper meant to strip me to the bone. "If you do not do exactly what I say, Nia, I will absolutely ruin you." I sit on the executive board of the National Jack and Jill Alumni Association. I have the ear of every major socialite, politician, and corporate leader in this entire city. If you do not fix this mess today, I will personally tell the entire board that you are mentally unstable. I will tell them the stress of your failing freelance career caused a severe psychotic break. I will make sure no respectable business in Atlanta ever associates with your little consulting firm again. You will be a total social and professional pariah. She actually thought her country club gossip held power over a billionaire private equity CEO. She was actively trying to weaponize her social calendar against my massive financial empire. Before I could even respond to the threat, Vivian turned toward the massive rolling rack of designer clothes the attendants had been arranging. She aggressively pulled out a stunning hand-beaded gown, a tailored cashmere winter coat, and several high-end imported leather handbags. She dumped the entire pile onto the velvet sofa. Chloe is incredibly distressed by your reckless behavior, my mother stated, pointing a manicured finger at the pile of luxury items. These clothes total exactly $50,000. You are going to take your credit card out right now and pay for them in full. You will send them directly to Chloe's hotel suite as a formal apology gift for embarrassing her. It is the absolute least you can do to start repairing the massive damage you have caused this family. Pay the bill, Nia. Show me you can finally be a cooperative daughter. She crossed her arms, waiting for me to submit. She fully expected me to pull out my card bow, my head in defeat, and buy back my place in her twisted hierarchy. Instead, I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. I bypassed her completely and walked over to the heavy frosted glass doors, pulling them wide open. I gestured down the hall to the boutique manager, a sharp-looking man named Francois, who immediately rushed over expecting to ring up a massive commission. "Yes, Ms. Adams," Francois asked politely, bowing his head slightly as he entered the room. "How may we assist you today?" I pointed directly at my mother, who was watching me with a confused sneer. "Francois, please cancel her exclusive VIP account immediately. I want her name permanently flagged in the system. She is no longer permitted to shop at this location or any of our sister stores nationwide." Vivian gasped loudly, her jaw dropping open in pure shock. "You cannot do that!" she shrieked, turning her furious gaze to Francois. "Do not listen to her. My husband and I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars here every single year. She has absolutely no authority over this store." Francois looked incredibly uncomfortable, but he stood his ground, maintaining his professional posture. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Adams," he said softly, his eyes darting to the floor. "But I must strictly comply with her orders." My mother looked at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shrill and bordering on genuine panic. "You cannot ban me from Maison de l'Elegance." I slid my phone back into my handbag and looked directly at the woman who had spent 32 years severely underestimating my intelligence. "Actually, Mother, I said, my voice radiating absolute unshakable authority. "I finalized the corporate acquisition of this luxury retail group exactly 3 days ago. As the new majority shareholder, I have the absolute right to refuse service to anyone, including a woman who actively covers up my husband's affairs." I turned my attention back to the terrified manager. "Francois, please have mall security escort this woman off my property right now." Vivian Adams, the undisputed queen of the Atlanta social scene, stood entirely frozen in terror as two uniformed security guards stepped into the private fitting room. They politely but firmly asked her to gather her things and leave. She did not scream. She did not fight back. She was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of my power. I watched her grab her purse and walk out of the boutique, her flawless image shattered, her ultimate social sanctuary permanently ripped away. My driver delivered me to my high-rise. I rode the elevator to my penthouse, poured a glass of Cabernet, and settled behind my desk. I clicked an encrypted meeting link on my laptop. For 18 months, I had been the anonymous lead investor in Marcus's tech startup, operating through a proxy firm named Vanguard Capital. He was entirely too arrogant to do proper due diligence. The corporate Zoom room blinked to life. A grid of video feeds displayed the grim faces of his 6 board members. I kept my camera turned off, and my microphone muted, represented only by a black square with the Vanguard logo. Marcus appeared looking like a hunted animal. He broadcast from his cramped home office, sweating heavily through a wrinkled shirt and pulling nervously at his collar. He forced a smile, hoping to project a confidence he did not possess. "Thank you all for jumping on this emergency call." Marcus began, his voice carrying a desperate tremor. "We hit a temporary administrative snag with our operating accounts. The bank initiated a standard security freeze, but I assure you, it is purely a bureaucratic glitch." Richard unmuted his microphone. "A bureaucratic glitch, Marcus. Our payroll bounces tomorrow morning. We are defaulting on vendor contracts, and Jamal Adams just pulled out of our joint commercial expansion. You need to give us answers right now." Marcus swallowed hard, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He leaned closer to his webcam, his eyes darting toward the black square representing my proxy firm. He was preparing to throw me under the bus to save his ship. "Listen, gentlemen. Marcus said, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone. I am going to be entirely transparent. This is a targeted, malicious attack, orchestrated by my vindictive soon-to-be ex-wife. She managed to file a series of fraudulent injunctions to lock our capital. She is actively trying to sabotage my algorithm to punish me for moving on. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus, sensing their hesitation, immediately pivoted his focus directly to my silent black square. He clasped his hands together in a pathetic begging gesture. That is exactly why I called this meeting, Marcus pleaded, leaning into the camera. I need Vanguard Capital to authorize an immediate emergency bridge loan. I am asking for $2 million to bypass these fraudulent injunctions, keep the servers running, and finalize the commercial real estate deal with my brother-in-law. Do not let a hysterical, jealous woman destroy a billion-dollar unicorn over a petty domestic dispute. Vanguard, I implore you to step up and protect your investment. I took a slow sip of my red wine. I carefully set the crystal glass down on my marble desk. I moved my cursor over the video settings. It was finally time to show him the monster he had foolishly created. I clicked the camera icon. On the zoom grid, the stark black Vanguard logo instantly vanished, replaced by a crystal-clear live feed of me sitting in my sprawling penthouse suite. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my wine and staring directly into the camera lens. The silence on the digital call was absolute and deafening. I watched Marcus's eyes widen to the size of saucers. He physically recoiled from his computer monitor, knocking his office chair backward into a bookshelf. His mouth fell open, but his vocal cords failed him. The board members leaned into their screens, squinting in confusion as they failed to understand why Marcus's allegedly hysterical ex-wife was suddenly representing their lead investor. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice perfectly calm and laced with absolute authority. It is truly fascinating to hear you describe my investment strategy as a petty domestic dispute. Nia, he choked out, grasping the edge of his desk. How are you? What is Vanguard? Vanguard Capital is a subsidiary portfolio managed entirely by Apex Holdings, I explained casually, swirling the wine in my glass. I am your anonymous lead investor. I am your majority shareholder. I am the sole owner of the corporate entity that holds the rights to your entire company. I froze those accounts because I own them. Richard unmuted his microphone, looking completely bewildered. Ms. Adams, if you are our lead investor, we urgently need to know how you plan to resolve this capital freeze. Marcus just stated his proprietary algorithm is on the verge of a major breakthrough. I turned my gaze to the camera, addressing the entire board with lethal precision. Marcus does not have a proprietary algorithm, Richard. He has a stolen one. During my time running my freelance consulting firm, I personally audited a struggling startup in Silicon Valley. I retained copies of their back-end code. Marcus discovered those files on my hard drive 3 years ago and copied them line for line, presenting the stolen architecture to this board as his original creation. Marcus practically lunged at his webcam. That is a lie, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. She is lying. She is trying to ruin me. I tapped my keyboard, transmitting a massive encrypted file directly into the Zoom chat box. I just sent the board the original source code dated 3 years before Marcus ever pitched his supposedly original concept. I also included the digital footprint showing the exact date and time he illegally transferred the files from my home network. You are not a tech genius, Marcus. You are a common thief who built a fragile house of cards on the back of my hard work. The board members began opening the files, their faces turning grim as they instantly verified the damning evidence. Marcus looked around his messy office like a trapped rat, realizing every single exit was completely sealed shut. I smiled at the camera, taking one last triumphant sip of wine. Your code is stolen, Marcus. And as majority shareholder, I am initiating a hostile takeover and firing you for cause. Please clean out your desk. The fallout from my hostile takeover was instantaneous. Within 24 hours, Marcus was completely locked out of his own building. His corporate email was disabled, and his personal accounts were frozen, pending a federal fraud investigation. I knew exactly what would happen next. Rats always scramble when the ship starts sinking. Chloe had spent the last 6 months living in a delusion of endless wealth funded entirely by stolen code and my invisible capital. Now that the tech money was gone, she was desperate to maintain her illusion of high society status. I tracked her movements easily. When you own the majority share of the private wealth management bank in Atlanta, keeping tabs on a panicked socialite trying to liquidate assets is child's play. The bank manager sent me a text message precisely at 10 in the morning. Chloe had just marched into the downtown branch, demanding an immediate meeting to secure a personal loan. She was using jewelry as collateral. I arrived at the bank 15 minutes later. The interior was a masterpiece of intimidation, featuring towering marble pillars, arched ceilings, and soundproof mahogany meeting rooms. I did not announce myself to the tellers. I walked straight past the velvet ropes and into the private wealth sector. Chloe was sitting in a plush leather chair in the manager's glass-walled office. She was nervously tapping her designer heel against the polished hardwood floor, clutching a velvet jewelry box. When she saw me walk through the door, her posture instantly stiffened. The bank manager immediately stood up, bowing his head slightly, and silently exiting the room to leave us alone. Chloe quickly recovered her composure, pasting on a mask of pure condescending arrogance. She crossed her legs and leaned back in the heavy leather chair. "Are you following me now, Nia?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake pity. "First you ruined Marcus at his board meeting, and now you are stalking me at the bank. It is honestly pathetic. You need to let it go. We won." I remained standing near the door, observing her frantic energy. "You are sitting in my bank, Chloe," I said calmly, "attempting to secure a personal loan because the man you stole cannot afford to buy you a cup of coffee this morning." Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes and reaching up to touch the massive diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The stones were enormous, catching the light and throwing brilliant prisms across the dark office walls. She stroked the jewels with a protective, greedy hand. "Marcus is just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue," she sneered. "He is a brilliant man. He will bounce back. And even if he takes a few months to restructure his assets, he still treats me exactly how a woman should be treated. He treats me like an absolute queen." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into spiteful slits. "He bought me this custom diamond piece just last week. He never bought you anything like this. He told me you were just a dropout workhorse who lacked the elegance to wear high-end jewelry. You are a stepping stone, Nia. I am the destination." I did not hear the rest of her pathetic insults. My eyes were completely locked on the heavy platinum setting holding the diamonds around her neck. The design was incredibly distinct, featuring a teardrop emerald surrounded by a chaotic starburst of brilliant cut diamonds. It was not a custom piece Marcus bought last week. It was a vintage masterpiece crafted in Paris in the 1920s. It was my late grandmother's necklace. A cold, calculating silence washed over me as the pieces of my family puzzle finally snapped perfectly into place. 10 years ago, my grandfather passed away, leaving that exact necklace to me in his will. It was the only item of real value I was supposed to inherit. But the necklace mysteriously vanished before the reading of the estate. My father Reginald looked me right in the eye and swore it was lost in a devastating fire at their summer home. He produced a heavily redacted insurance claim to prove it was gone forever. He used the payout to fund Jamal's business venture, but it had never burned. Reginald had kept it hidden in a vault. And when Jamal became desperate for Marcus to secure his commercial loan, Reginald must have given the necklace to Marcus as a secret bribe. A little under the table collateral to keep the tech money flowing into Jamal's sinking firm. And Marcus, the arrogant fool, immediately gifted the stolen heirloom to his mistress to buy her loyalty. Chloe misinterpreted my silence for jealousy. She smiled, tracing the teardrop emerald with her manicured fingernail. "It is beautiful, is it not?" she taunted. "Marcus said it cost over $500,000. It requires a certain type of class to pull off." "You are right, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm whisper. "It is a very expensive piece, and it has a fascinating history." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not break eye contact with her as I dialed a direct line. Chloe watched me, her smug smile slowly faltering as my expression remained completely devoid of emotion. The line connected after 2 short rings. "Yes, this is Nia Adams," I said, speaking clearly into the receiver. "I need to dispatch an officer to the First Republic Private Wealth Branch downtown immediately." Chloe stood up, the velvet jewelry box sliding off her lap and hitting the floor. "Who are you calling?" she demanded, her voice pitching higher with sudden panic. "What are you doing?" I held up a single finger, demanding her absolute silence. I continued speaking into the phone. "Yes, officer, I am currently standing with a woman who is wearing a distinct piece of jewelry reported stolen exactly 10 years ago. And I have the original police report to prove it." The police response was remarkably swift. Within 10 minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived at the private wealth branch and placed Chloe in handcuffs right in the middle of the pristine marble lobby. She shrieked and fought, struggling violently against the cold metal as they marched her past the terrified bank tellers and bewildered wealthy patrons. She screamed my name, hurling vicious profanities and threatening endless lawsuits, but I watched her unceremonious exit with absolute surgical detachment. My phone buzzed aggressively before I even reached the underground parking garage. The caller ID flashed my father's name. Reginald Adams did not call me to check on my well-being or to ask for my side of the story. He called to dictate. When I answered the line, his voice was a low, furious growl demanding I meet him immediately at the site of Jamal's supposedly groundbreaking luxury commercial development. He informed me he had already dispatched his legal team to pay Chloe's exorbitant bail, and he was ready to unleash his absolute wrath upon me. I directed my driver to the specific coordinates. We navigated away from the polished financial district and arrived at a desolate stretch of prime real estate on the neglected edge of the city. The site was an absolute ghost town. Chain-link fences sagged miserably under the weight of overgrown creeping vines. Weeds cracked through the uneven concrete slabs, and rusted rebar jutted out of the dark dirt like decaying skeletal bones. There was no heavy construction equipment, no active workers, and zero visible progress. It was a barren, embarrassing monument to Jamal's utter incompetence as a businessman. Reginald stood waiting in the center of the dirt lot, pacing furiously in his tailored charcoal suit. His face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. When I stepped out of the climate-controlled comfort of my car, he marched directly toward me, his heavy leather shoes kicking up thick clouds of dry dust. "You have completely lost your mind, Nia," he roared, entirely bypassing any standard greeting. "You had Chloe arrested like a common criminal in broad daylight. You publicly humiliated Jamal. You dragged our impeccable family name through the mud over a piece of old jewelry." I stood perfectly still, letting his unwarranted self-righteous rage wash over me, without absorbing a single drop of it. "You lied about the fire, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice completely level and devoid of emotion. "You committed brazen insurance fraud and stole my rightful inheritance just to hand it over to Marcus as a desperate secret bribe to keep Jamal afloat." Reginald did not even possess the basic decency to look ashamed. He stopped his frantic pacing and glared down at me, his eyes burning with toxic patriarchal righteousness. "I did what I absolutely had to do for the survival of this family," he snapped, gesturing wildly at the empty dirt lot surrounding us. "Jamal is the heir to our name. He is the future of the Adams legacy. He desperately needed the collateral to secure the financing for this specific land development. You would never understand that burden because you never respected our family legacy. You were always too stubborn, too obsessed with your own little freelance projects to see the bigger picture. We needed that tech capital from Marcus to build this empire." I looked around the overgrown, weed-infested lot and let out a harsh, humorless laugh that echoed off the rusted fencing. "You call this sad wasteland an empire?" I asked, pointing directly at a pile of discarded, shattered pipes. "Jamal has held this commercial property for 2 years, and he has not moved a single shovel of dirt. He is bleeding money every single fiscal quarter, and you are actively committing felonies just to plug the massive holes in his sinking ship." Reginald took a sudden, menacing step forward, aggressively closing the physical distance between us. His looming presence was clearly meant to intimidate me, to shrink me back into the obedient, subservient daughter he had always demanded. "You listen to me very carefully," he hissed, pointing a thick, trembling finger mere inches from my face. "You are going to call the police precinct right now and completely drop the theft charges against Chloe. You are going to immediately unfreeze Marcus's corporate accounts and let his board proceed with their daily operations. If you do not comply with my direct orders, I will personally dismantle your entire life." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and blind desperation. "I know every mayor, judge, and influential city council member in Atlanta. I play golf with the federal regulators who govern private equity firms. I will pull every political string I have gathered over 30 years to audit your precious little companies into dust. I will make sure you cannot secure a single operational permit or vendor contract in this entire state. You think you hold power because you bought a few shares of a boutique, but I am the bedrock of this city. I will completely ruin you, Nia." He was breathing heavily, fully believing his outdated political connections still held weight against a billionaire. He thought he was the undisputed king standing on a kingdom he had secured for his golden child. He expected me to cower, to apologize, and to submit to his demands. I did not flinch. I calmly reached into my designer leather tote bag and retrieved a thick manila folder. I slid out a pristine set of architectural blueprints and a legally binding commercial lease agreement stamped with the official corporate seal of the state. I held the crisp documents up, forcing him to look directly at the bold, fine print. "You didn't secure this land, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial, absolute chill. "You leased it. From me. And because Jamal hasn't poured a single foundation in 2 years, I am seizing the property." I left my father standing in the swirling dust of his own failure. Less than 48 hours later, the true desperation of the Addams family reached its absolute boiling point. I was enjoying a quiet, solitary dinner in the private suite of Le Petit Coeur, an exclusive French restaurant in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. I had specifically requested absolute privacy to review my corporate acquisition files over a plate of perfectly seared filet mignon and a glass of vintage Bordeaux. The heavy mahogany doors to my private dining room suddenly flew open with a violent crash. The restaurant maitre d' looked terrified as he was aggressively shoved aside by Reginald. My entire family filed into the room like a pack of starving, desperate wolves cornering their intended prey. They formed a tight, unified wall of hostility. Reginald entered first, his face a mask of cold, ruthless fury. Vivian followed closely behind him, practically vibrating with aristocratic indignation and clutching her designer purse like a weapon. Jamal looked pale and sweaty, entirely out of his depth, but desperate to save his sinking empire. Marcus and Chloe brought up the rear. Chloe was still aggressively rubbing her wrists where the police handcuffs had left faint red marks, a stark visual reminder of her brief, humiliating stay in a downtown holding cell. They quickly surrounded my table, cutting off any potential exit. I did not stop cutting my steak. I calmly placed a piece of meat in my mouth and chewed slowly, refusing to show them a single ounce of intimidation. Reginald stepped forward and threw a thick leather portfolio onto the center of the white linen tablecloth, violently upsetting my wineglass and sending a dark red stain spreading across the pristine fabric. "We are completely done playing these childish games," Nia Reginald announced, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. "We have formed a united front against you. You are going to sign over the deeds to the commercial property immediately. You are going to unfreeze Marcus's corporate funds tonight. And you are going to call the district attorney and drop the theft charges against Chloe right now." I slowly wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, setting it down on the ruined tablecloth. "And if I refuse your demands," I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. Jamal stepped forward, pulling a stack of highly realistic financial records from the leather portfolio. "If you refuse, we will completely destroy you," Jamal said, his voice shaking slightly with nervous adrenaline. "These are offshore banking records, wire transfer receipts, and dummy corporate accounts. They clearly show that you embezzled billions of dollars from your previous corporate clients to illegally fund Vanguard Capital." I stared down at the papers spread across the table. They were incredibly impressive forgeries. They had clearly paid top dollar on the black market to manufacture a perfectly damning paper trail. It was a complete and utter lie, but in the ruthless world of high finance, an accusation of massive embezzlement was more than enough to trigger a devastating federal audit tank, my stock prices, and ruin my professional reputation permanently. They were essentially holding my entire life hostage. Vivian placed her manicured hands on the table, leaning down to look me directly in the eye. The press will absolutely feast on this horrific narrative, Nia, my mother whispered, her tone dripping with venom. The arrogant self-made billionaire exposed as a common criminal fraud. Your entire empire will collapse overnight. No legitimate firm will ever associate with you again. We will leak these forged documents to every major news outlet in the country by tomorrow morning unless you give us exactly what we want. Chloe stepped out from behind Marcus, a nasty, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She leaned over, placing her hands on the back of my chair. White-collar crimes ruin black women in this city. Nia, she sneered, her tone radiating a sickeningly smug satisfaction. Be a good girl and sign. I looked around the room carefully, studying their faces. They were entirely serious. My own flesh and blood. My former husband and his mistress were fully willing to commit massive federal fraud and destroy my life just to maintain their fake country club status. I knew exactly what I had to do. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my hands to tremble slightly. I looked down at the table, allowing a convincing look of total devastating defeat to wash over my features. You win, I said, my voice dropping to a broken, defeated whisper. I cannot fight all of you at once. If you leak those documents to the press, I will lose absolutely everything I have built. The heavy tension in the room instantly vanished. Reginald let out a loud, arrogant bark of laughter, slapping Jamal hard on the back. Marcus smirked, crossing his arms in ultimate triumph. Vivian sighed heavily, adjusting her pearl necklace as if the natural order of the universe had finally been restored. I need 24 hours to process the massive corporate asset transfers, I continued, keeping my eyes cast downward in fake submission. My legal team requires written authorization. Bring the final transfer deeds to Jamal's massive grand opening gala tomorrow night. I will sign everything over to you. I will even take the stage and make a public apology to the family for my erratic behavior. Jamal puffed out his chest, looking immensely relieved. My real estate firm is hosting 300 of the most influential investors in Atlanta tomorrow night, he stated proudly. A public apology will go a long way in repairing the massive damage you caused to our family name. Do not try anything stupid, Nia. We will have the forged documents queued up and ready to send to the press if you back out. Reginald pulled a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket and slammed it onto the table, along with a heavy gold fountain pen. Sign this preliminary agreement now, he demanded, just so we know you are completely serious about surrendering tomorrow night. I slowly picked up the gold pen. I looked at the generic typed agreement demanding my total compliance. I reached into my own leather tote bag and pulled out a similarly typed document, sliding it smoothly over Reginald's paper. I need to sign my own legal release first to authorize the unfreezing. I lied smoothly. I signed my name with a swift, fluid motion, entirely dropping the defeated act. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress, and grabbed my coat. I will see all of you at the gala tomorrow night, I said, pushing past Marcus and walking confidently out the door. They celebrated their massive victory in my private dining room, entirely unaware of the fatal mistake they had just made. The paper I had just signed and slipped into my bag was not a preliminary transfer agreement or a surrender of my assets. It was an official consent authorization for an active FBI wiretap. The evening sun bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, dramatic shadows across the marble floors. I stood entirely still in the center of my dressing room, allowing my stylist to pull the heavy zipper up the back of the blood-red designer gown. The silk fabric clung to my frame like a second skin, pooling at my feet in a dramatic sweep of crimson. It was not just a dress. It was a suit of armor forged in power. I stared at my reflection in the gilded floor-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer the obedient daughter, the supportive wife, or the convenient stepping stone. She was the architect of their impending destruction. The soft hum of my phone vibrating against the vanity broke the heavy silence in the room. I waved the stylist away with a brief nod. She quietly gathered her supplies and exited the suite, leaving me completely alone. I picked up the phone. It was David, my lead corporate attorney, the man who had spent the last 24 hours coordinating with federal agents. The wiretap authorization is fully active and processing, David said, his voice tight with an underlying current of absolute disbelief. Nia, I have been practicing corporate law for 30 years, and I have never seen a web of financial deception quite this brazen. The preliminary data dumps we just pulled from Marcus's servers are catastrophic. I activated the speakerphone and set the device on my vanity table, carefully applying a red lipstick that perfectly matched my gown. Tell me exactly what we are looking at, David. I instructed, my hand perfectly steady. He let out a heavy sigh, shuffling stacks of paper on his end of the line. Marcus and your brother Jamal have been running a massive money laundering syndicate right under your father's nose. Jamal's commercial real estate firm was essentially a black hole. He was securing loans for phantom developments that never even broke ground. To hide the missing millions, he funneled the cash directly into Marcus's tech startup. They classified the stolen capital as anonymous angel investments to artificially inflate Marcus's corporate valuation. I paused for a moment, capping the lipstick tube. And Chloe? I asked, already knowing the answer. What was her specific role in this pathetic little syndicate? Chloe was the designated launderer, David confirmed. She used her position as an independent consultant to generate thousands of fake vendor invoices. She billed Marcus's company for fictitious software integration services and routed the clean money straight back into offshore accounts controlled entirely by Jamal. It was a continuous loop of fraud. They used your capital to fund the tech firm, used the tech firm to wash the real estate loans, and used Chloe to forge the receipts. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. My father had stood in that dirt lot, screaming about the family legacy, while his golden child was actively orchestrating a federal racketeering ring with my thieving husband and his desperate mistress. They had the nerve to ambush me at dinner and threaten to frame me for their exact crimes. They thought they were untouchable because they possessed the Adams name. They thought the rules simply did not apply to them. The federal agents have enough probable cause to move in tonight. David continued, his tone turning incredibly serious. They are monitoring the audio feeds from the devices we planted inside the gala venue. But I need you to understand the gravity of what is about to happen, Nia. If you walk into that ballroom tonight and trigger this trap, there is absolutely no turning back. This goes far beyond corporate bankruptcy or simple public humiliation. We are talking about federal indictments, wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering. Marcus, Jamal, and Chloe are looking at mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary. They will lose their freedom. Your father will lose his social standing when the press realizes he enabled this syndicate. The Adams family name will be disgraced. He paused, letting the reality of his warning settle over the line. They are still your family, Nia. Once the FBI raids that gala, they will be taken out in handcuffs. Are you absolutely certain you want to pull the trigger on this? I leaned closer to the mirror, examining the cold, detached calmness in my dark eyes. I thought about the decades I spent shrinking myself to make Jamal look taller. I thought about my mother, demanding I pay $50,000 to the woman who was sleeping with my husband. I thought about Reginald threatening to destroy my business to protect a fake empire. They had prepared a slaughterhouse for me. They had tied the noose and handed me the rope, fully expecting me to hang myself to save their miserable lives. They did not deserve a single ounce of my mercy. I am absolutely certain, David, I replied, my voice ringing with lethal conviction. Have the agent standing by. I will give the signal precisely at 9 o'clock. I ended the call and tossed the phone into my evening clutch. I opened the velvet jewelry box sitting on my vanity. Resting on the dark satin was my grandmother's vintage diamond and emerald necklace. The heirloom Reginald had lied about. The treasure Marcus had stolen to buy Chloe's loyalty. The priceless artifact I had reclaimed from the police precinct evidence locker just 2 hours ago. I lifted the heavy platinum chain and secured the clasp around my neck. The massive emerald rested perfectly against my collarbone, radiating a brilliant power. The cold weight of the diamonds felt like justice against my skin. I grabbed my clutch and turned toward the bedroom door, stepping into my designer heels. They didn't care when they threw me to the wolves, I whispered to the empty room, a dark, ruthless smile curving my lips. Let's see how they survive the slaughterhouse. The grand opening gala for Jamal's real estate firm was an ostentatious display of stolen wealth. The sprawling ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was packed wall to wall with Atlanta's elite wealthy venture capitalists and high society socialites. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of tailored tuxedos and evening gowns. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated through the crowded room carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne. Jamal had liquidated whatever remaining legitimate funds he possessed to fund this desperate illusion of success. I stepped out of my chauffeured car and walked up the grand staircase. The heavy blood-red silk of my designer gown trailed behind me like a liquid shadow. The moment I entered the main ballroom, conversations abruptly stopped. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the city's most influential players took in the sight of the woman they believed was completely broken. I held my head high, the cool, heavy weight of my grandmother's vintage emerald and diamond necklace resting perfectly against my collarbone. It was the ultimate symbol of my reclamation. I navigated the crowded floor with absolute purpose, heading directly toward the velvet VIP section positioned near the main stage. I did not make it past the entrance. Vivian and Chloe materialized out of the crowd, blocking my path like two sentinels guarding a fragile fortress. Chloe wore a flashy sequined dress that looked incredibly cheap under the harsh ballroom lighting. Her eyes immediately darted to my neck, her smug expression faltering for a fraction of a second as she recognized the priceless heirloom Marcus had stolen from me. She quickly recovered, crossing her arms and blocking the velvet rope. "You actually showed up," Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "I thought you would sign the papers and hide like a coward." Vivian stepped forward, violently grabbing my forearm. Her grip was painfully tight, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. She shoved a folded piece of heavy cardstock into my palm. "Don't you ever dare embarrass us tonight, Nia," my mother whispered, her voice a venomous hiss disguised by a bright camera-ready smile. "You will walk up those stairs when Jamal calls your name. You will read the apology script we gave you word for word. You will smile and you will validate your brother. If you deviate from this paper by a single syllable, Reginald will have the forged embezzlement documents sent to the press before you walk off the stage." I looked down at the heavy cardstock in my hand. It was a pathetic, fabricated confession, admitting to erratic behavior and begging my family for forgiveness. I slowly looked back up at Vivian, locking eyes with the woman who had spent my entire life trying to diminish me. I did not say a word. Before Vivian could launch into another desperate threat, a flurry of activity parted the crowd behind her. The mayor of Atlanta, flanked by his security detail, was making his way toward the VIP section. Vivian instantly released my arm. She smoothed her designer dress and pasted on her most charming aristocratic smile, stepping forward to intercept the politician. "Good evening, Mr. Mayor." Vivian projected her voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "We are honored that you could attend Jamal's historic event." The mayor did not even look at her. He walked directly past Vivian, ignoring her outstretched hand and bypassing Chloe as if she were cheap furniture. He stopped right in front of me, his face breaking into a massive, genuine smile. "Nia!" he boomed, pulling me into a warm, familiar hug that sent shockwaves through the surrounding crowd. "It is wonderful to see you tonight. I cannot thank you enough for the massive wire transfer this morning. Your foundation fully funding the city's new youth initiative is the largest philanthropic contribution Atlanta has seen in a decade. You saved our community centers." Vivian stood completely frozen, her hand dropping awkwardly to her side. Chloe's jaw practically unhinged as she stared at the mayor in absolute, dumbfounded shock. They had spent the last 48 hours treating me like a defeated criminal, completely unaware that I was moving millions of dollars in legitimate philanthropic capital while they were busy playing mobsters. I smiled warmly at the mayor. "It is my absolute pleasure to invest in the future of this city," I replied, projecting my voice clearly. "Legitimate business must always give back to the community." The subtle emphasis on the word legitimate caused Vivian to flinch. Suddenly, the heavy ballroom lights dimmed. A bright spotlight snapped on, illuminating the massive main stage at the front of the room. The crowd fell silent as Marcus walked up to the sleek acrylic podium. He wore a custom tuxedo and a look of supreme, arrogant confidence. He tapped the microphone, testing the sound before leaning in. "Good evening, Atlanta," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the future. I am incredibly proud to officially announce a historic permanent merger between my technology firm and Jamal Adams' real estate empire." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Marcus smiled, raising a crystal flute of champagne high into the air. He looked directly at the VIP section, bypassing me entirely, and locking eyes with his mistress. "And I want to raise a special glass to the woman who made this brilliant integration possible," he declared, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "To Chloe." He raised the glass higher, preparing to deliver his final toast. I stood in the darkness of the VIP section, my blood-red dress blending into the shadows. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, tapping a single prearranged icon. On the balcony above, a federal agent disguised as the head sound engineer received my signal. He reached down and violently yanked the master cord from the mixing board. The microphone went completely dead. The sudden silence in the grand ballroom was deafening. The heavy thud of the dead microphone echoed briefly before fading into the cavernous space. Marcus tapped the top of the silver mesh grill, his confident smile faltering, as the dull thumps failed to project through the speakers. He looked frantically toward the sound booth, waving his hands in a frantic slashing motion. Down in the VIP section, Vivian and Chloe exchanged nervous glances, the first cracks of genuine panic appearing on their perfectly contoured faces. They sensed the shift in the room. The atmosphere had turned electric, charged with the anticipation of a storm about to break. I stepped out of the shadows and moved toward the main stage. The heavy blood-red silk of my gown swept across the polished floorboards like a rising tide. The crowd parted instinctively. Wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites stepped back, giving me a wide berth as I approached the grand staircase. Every eye in the room was locked on me. I climbed the stairs with slow, deliberate precision. The vintage emerald around my neck caught the stage lights, casting fractured green prisms across the walls. When I stepped onto the platform, Marcus finally realized what was happening. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He dropped the dead microphone and lunged across the stage, his hand outstretched to grab my arm and force me out of the spotlight. He never made contact. Before his fingers could even graze the silk of my dress, a massive figure stepped out from behind the velvet stage curtains. My lead private security contractor moved with terrifying speed. He intercepted Marcus, grabbing his outstretched wrist and twisting it sharply downward with a sickening crunch. Marcus let out a high-pitched yelp of pain, dropping to his knees as the security guard easily immobilized him, pinning his arm painfully against his back. The audience gasped in unison. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Jamal, who had been standing near the edge of the stage, froze completely, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He looked at his best friend writhing on the floor, and then looked at me, realizing his entire world was about to collapse. I stepped up to the acrylic podium. The federal agent in the sound booth immediately activated the secondary microphone I had discreetly clipped to the neckline of my dress. I looked out over the sea of faces, finding my mother and Chloe standing frozen in the VIP section. Their faces were drained of all color. "My brother and my husband just spoke about legacy and innovation," I said, my voice projecting with crystal-clear authority across the massive ballroom. I let the words hang in the air, ensuring every single person in the room was hanging on my next breath. What they did not mention is that their historic merger is actually a desperate attempt to cover up a $15 million money laundering scheme. The ballroom erupted. The polite murmurs morphed into a chaotic roar of absolute shock. High-profile venture capitalists dropped their champagne glasses. City officials began frantically whispering to their aides. The perfect illusion Jamal and Marcus had built was shattering into a million pieces. Jamal completely lost what little composure he possessed. He sprinted toward the sound booth, waving his arms like a madman. "Turn off her mic!" he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Cut the power! She is crazy! She is a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin us! Turn it off right now!" I did not break eye contact with the crowd. I stood perfectly still, letting Jamal humiliate himself. I raised my hand, giving a subtle nod to the balcony. Suddenly, the massive digital projector screens flanking the main stage flashed to life. The screens were over 20 feet tall, designed to showcase the architectural renderings. Instead, they displayed something far more captivating. High-resolution images of offshore banking statements filled the massive displays. The crowd watched in stunned silence as a synchronized slideshow began revealing the exact anatomy of their criminal syndicate. There were detailed wire transfer receipts routing millions of dollars from the real estate holding company directly into the supposedly legitimate tech startup. There were highlighted columns showing the phantom loans Jamal had secured using fraudulent property appraisals. But the most damning evidence was displayed on the center screen. A series of heavily redacted vendor invoices billing for fictitious software integration services. At the bottom of every single fake invoice was the unmistakable looping signature of Chloe. I watched Chloe physically stumble backward in the VIP section, bringing a trembling hand to her mouth. Vivian grabbed her arm, looking up at the screens in absolute horror. The undeniable proof of their federal crimes was broadcasting to 300 of the most influential people in the state. "These documents are currently in the possession of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I announced, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. "The phantom developments, the illegal capital injections, and the forged invoices are all part of a systematic racketeering ring orchestrated by the men standing on this stage. They used my legitimate capital to build a house of cards. They threatened to destroy my professional reputation if I did not willingly surrender my assets to cover their massive federal debts. They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought they could use my name to shield themselves from consequence." I looked down at Marcus, who was still pinned to the stage floor by my security guard. He looked up at me, his face pale and glistening with cold sweat. The arrogant smirk he had worn just 5 minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a man who knew his life was over. The slaughterhouse doors were locked permanently shut. I stood in the bright spotlight and watched my entire family face their ultimate ruin. Total chaos erupted across the ballroom. The venue transformed into a frantic, shouting mob of panicked billionaires. Men in tailored tuxedos shoved past each other, desperately pulling out their cell phones to call their private brokers. The glowing screens illuminated their terrified faces. They were screaming frantic orders to liquidate their shares, pull their investments, and sever all ties with Vanguard Capital and Jamal's real estate firm immediately. The elegant clinking of crystal glasses was entirely replaced by the deafening roar of impending financial ruin. Waiters dropped their heavy silver trays, the crashing sounds completely lost in the cacophony of a wealthy stampede. Millions of dollars in capital were evaporating by the second as Atlanta's elite scrambled to protect their own wealth from the toxic radioactive fallout of my family's exposed crimes. I stood at the acrylic podium, calmly watching the mass exodus of their meticulously curated network. Marcus was still pinned to the polished floor by my private security contractor, his custom tuxedo twisted and hopelessly wrinkled. Desperation completely overtook his common sense. He thrashed wildly, managing to wrench his head up and shout over the deafening noise of the fleeing crowd. He did not care that his microphone was dead. He screamed with the raw, guttural panic of a cornered animal facing the slaughterhouse. "Do not listen to her," Marcus roared, his voice cracking with strain as he desperately tried to catch the attention of the fleeing venture capitalists. "These documents are completely fabricated. They are obvious fakes manufactured by a bitter, scorned woman. My wife is having a severe mental breakdown. She is completely delusional because I left her. I filed for divorce because she is clinically crazy, and I left her for Chloe." He twisted his neck, searching the panicked crowd for anyone willing to buy his pathetic, fabricated narrative. She is just a jealous, hysterical woman trying to destroy my historic success out of pure, unadulterated spite. Do not pull your funding, it is all a lie. His voice was raw and bleeding with toxic patriarchal entitlement. He fully expected the room full of wealthy men to side with him, to instantly dismiss my calculated precision as the emotional outburst of a rejected, unstable wife. He truly thought the old rules of the boys' club would magically save him from a federal indictment. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to argue with a man currently writhing on the floor in a puddle of his own making. I simply looked at the sound engineer stationed in the balcony and gave a second subtle nod. The massive digital screens behind me went entirely black. The chaotic shouting in the ballroom faltered quickly, replaced by a sudden chilling silence as a sharp audio crackle echoed loudly through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. A crisp, undeniably clear audio recording began to play. It was not a phone call, it was the digital wiretap audio captured directly from the hidden devices we had planted earlier that week. The voice that filled the grand ballroom belonged unequivocally to Chloe. Her tone was completely stripped of its usual breathy fake innocence. It was sharp, calculating, and dripping with malicious intent. "We need to move the timeline up." Jamal Chloe's voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "Reginald is getting suspicious of the missing capital. We have to completely drain his personal retirement accounts by Friday, before his private accountants run the quarterly audit." Jamal's recorded voice responded immediately, sounding anxious but entirely complicit. "If we drain my father's retirement funds, the entire Adams estate goes bankrupt. We will lose the ancestral properties." "I do not care about your father's outdated properties," Chloe snapped back, her voice echoing with chilling clarity. "I am giving you the access codes to Marcus's offshore tech accounts tonight. I have him completely wrapped around my finger. He thinks I am just his beautiful, loyal mistress. He is a pathetic, gullible fool. I sleep in his bed, he gives me his passwords, and I transfer the clean cash directly to you. But you need to drain Reginald's accounts and route that money into the syndicate right now. Once we combine Marcus's tech funds with your father's retirement cash, we leave them both holding the bag. I'm not going down for their sloppy mistakes. We take the money and cut them entirely loose." The recording laid her ultimate deception completely bare. Chloe was not just sleeping with Marcus to secure her elite status. She was actively using him to steal his tech funds, while simultaneously conspiring with Jamal to completely bankrupt my father. She was playing every single man in the Addams family against each other, orchestrating the systematic draining of their entire financial legacy to line her own pockets. She was not a loyal ally to any of them. She was a highly calculating parasite, feeding on their immense greed. The sheer magnitude of her betrayal left them entirely speechless and utterly defenseless. The glorious future they had promised each other was nothing but a mirage. They were all completely destroyed. The audio clicked off, leaving a silence so profound it felt physically suffocating. Every single guest remaining in the VIP section turned to stare at the woman in the cheap sequined dress. Vivian staggered backward, her hand flying to her chest as the brutal reality of her husband's impending bankruptcy finally hit her. Reginald stood completely paralyzed, his face draining of all color as he realized his precious golden boy had actively conspired to steal his entire life savings. But the most devastating, undeniable reaction belonged to Jamal. The arrogant heir, the man who believed he was building a monumental empire, the golden child who thought Chloe was the ultimate status symbol, elevating his power, finally understood the absolute horrifying truth. Jamal turned slowly, his eyes wide and hollow, to look directly at Chloe. He realized he had been completely played by the very woman he thought elevated his status. The profound silence that had paralyzed the entire ballroom lasted only a fraction of a second before the raw, explosive reality of the betrayal finally detonated. Jamal stood completely frozen, staring at the woman he had risked his entire empire to impress. His eyes darted from Chloe's terrified, trembling face down to Marcus, who was currently struggling to push himself up from the polished wooden floor of the stage. The realization hit Jamal with the brutal, devastating force of a freight train. The money, the secret offshore accounts, the endless forged invoices, and the meticulously planned corporate sabotage had all been orchestrated by the two people he trusted most in the world. He had been nothing more than a convenient, gullible pawn in their twisted, highly lucrative game of greed and deception. A primal, guttural roar suddenly tore from Jamal's throat. It was not the sound of a refined corporate executive or a polished real estate mogul. It was the sound of a man whose fragile ego had just been completely and utterly decimated in front of the entire city. My private security guard, recognizing the immediate shift in the atmosphere, stepped back and released his iron grip on Marcus. He did not need to hold him down anymore. Jamal lunged across the stage like a wild, rabid animal. He collided with Marcus before the tech CEO could even get to his feet, sending them both crashing violently into the clear acrylic podium. The heavy structure shattered upon impact, sending sharp shards of plastic flying across the elevated platform. The two men who had spent their entire lives cultivating an image of untouchable perfection were instantly reduced to brawling beasts. Jamal threw a heavy, brutal punch that landed squarely on Marcus's jaw. Bright red blood instantly sprayed across the pristine white collar of Marcus's custom tuxedo. Marcus retaliated blindly, clawing at Jamal's face and aggressively tearing the expensive fabric of his tailored suit jacket. They rolled across the stage, a tangled, pathetic mess of ripped silk, bruised egos, and unchecked primal rage. They knocked over towering floral arrangements and smashed expensive stage lighting. The remaining venture capitalists who had not already fled for the exits stood frozen in absolute horror, watching the supposedly brilliant architects of Atlanta's future tear each other apart with their bare hands. The absolute destruction of their dignity was a spectacle of pure poetic justice. I stood off to the side, watching the violent culmination of their boundless arrogance with cold, detached satisfaction. They were finally destroying each other just as they had continuously tried to destroy me. "Stop it right now," Reginald bellowed, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated desperation. My father frantically shoved his way through the stunned crowd, rushing toward the edge of the shattered stage. His face was a dark, mottled purple, his chest heaving as he watched his golden child brawling like a common street thug. The pristine Addams family legacy, the flawless reputation he had spent decades meticulously building and violently protecting, was burning to the ground right in front of his eyes. He frantically waved his arms at the lingering members of the press and the shocked city officials trying desperately to salvage the unsalvageable. "Please, I beg of you, everyone," Reginald shouted, employing his deepest, most commanding, respectable patriarch voice in a futile attempt to restore order. "This is a private family matter, a simple, terrible misunderstanding. Please respect our privacy and clear the room immediately." He was grasping at smoke. No one moved. The security guards ignored him. The crowd remained glued to the horrific spectacle, transfixed by the complete public collapse of the city's most powerful dynasty. I slowly descended the grand staircase, my designer heels clicking methodically against the polished marble floor. The heavy crimson silk of my gown dragged behind me as I walked directly toward the man who had enabled this entire nightmare. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and absolute awe. I stopped right in front of the velvet VIP rope, directly facing my father. "Private?" I asked, my voice ringing with lethal absolute clarity, slicing through the loud, chaotic noise of the fighting men on the stage. "You actually want to call this a private family matter, Reginald?" He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden terrifying realization that I was not finished. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice dropping to a panicked, desperate whisper. "You have made your point. You have ruined them both. Do not do this. Do not destroy the family name." I did not lower my voice. I projected it, ensuring every single word reached the farthest corners of the ballroom. "Private, like how you privately mortgaged Mom's ancestral home to pay off Marcus's silence?" I demanded, watching the last drop of blood drain from his panicked face. I turned my head slowly, locking my gaze onto Vivian. My mother was standing completely rigid, her hands clutching her designer evening bag so tightly her knuckles were stark white. "Yes, Mom," I stated, my voice perfectly steady and merciless. "Dad knew absolutely everything. He discovered the disgusting affair between Marcus and Chloe months ago, but instead of telling you the truth, instead of protecting his own daughter, he decided to protect the men of the family. He knew Jamal would be publicly humiliated if the world found out his brilliant business partner was sleeping with his mistress right under his nose. So your beloved husband took out a massive secret mortgage on your grandmother's historic estate. He quietly handed Marcus $2 million of your inherited wealth to keep his mouth shut and preserve Jamal's fragile, pathetic ego. Vivian let out a blood-curdling scream of absolute betrayal. She finally realized her husband had completely sold her out just to protect the men. The flawless family facade shattered into a million pieces. She dropped to her knees, weeping over the ultimate destruction of her sacred, hollow, worthless, pathetic life. The piercing wail of police sirens suddenly shattered the heavy atmosphere of the ballroom, cutting right through Vivian's agonized sobs. The deafening noise grew exponentially louder, echoing off the towering skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta and vibrating against the thick walls of the Ritz-Carlton. A violent kaleidoscope of flashing red and blue lights pierced through the massive stained glass windows lining the eastern wall of the venue. The frantic emergency lights painted the terrified faces of the remaining venture capitalists and socialites in harsh, unforgiving colors. The golden glow of the crystal chandeliers was entirely swallowed by the chaotic strobe effect of impending justice. The reality of the situation finally slammed into the crowd. This was no longer a scandalous corporate meltdown or a dramatic family dispute. This was an active federal crime scene, and the authorities had finally arrived to collect the bodies. Marcus scrambled backward across the debris of the shattered acrylic podium, slipping on the slick polished wood. He kicked Jamal away, leaving his bleeding business partner groaning on the floor. Survival instinct entirely overrode Marcus's bruised ego. He scrambled to his feet, his custom tuxedo torn and stained with his own blood, and bolted toward the dimly lit service corridor at the rear of the stage. Down on the main floor, Chloe realized the trap was rapidly closing around her. The smug superiority she had worn all evening evaporated instantly. She frantically attempted to slip into the dense crowd of terrified guests. Her hands shook violently as she desperately unclasped her heavy diamond bracelets and yanked the stolen platinum necklace from her throat. She tossed the priceless jewelry behind a massive potted fern, attempting to shed her stolen wealth and disguise herself as a random innocent bystander trapped in the chaos. Her pathetic attempt at camouflage was entirely futile. I raised my hand, giving a sharp, definitive signal to my lead security contractor. My private security team moved with terrifying synchronized precision. Broad-shouldered men in tactical black suits stepped out from the shadows, simultaneously blocking every single exit in the grand ballroom. Two massive guards stepped directly in front of the service doors at the back of the stage, cutting off Marcus's only escape route. Marcus slammed his palms against the heavy oak doors, screaming at the guards to move, but they stood like statues made of solid granite. Down on the floor, another pair of guards stepped directly into Chloe's path, forcing her backward into the brightly lit center of the room. I leaned into the microphone on the podium, my voice dropping to a low, icy frequency that resonated through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. "Nobody leaves." I commanded, the absolute authority in my tone, freezing the panicked crowd in their tracks. "The doors are locked, and the perimeter is entirely sealed. You will all remain exactly where you are standing until the federal authorities have completed their primary sweep of this venue." A terrifying hush fell over the room, broken only by the deafening wail of the sirens outside and the pathetic sound of Vivian weeping on the plush carpet of the VIP section. Reginald stood frozen, his face devoid of all color, realizing he was completely trapped in a nightmare of his own creation. He tried to project his usual patriarchal dominance, but his hands were trembling so violently he had to grasp the velvet rope for physical support. Jamal sat slumped on the edge of the stage, spitting blood onto the polished floorboards, staring blankly at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the ceiling. The heavy reinforced oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom were violently thrown open with explosive force. A massive tactical unit of federal agents stormed directly into the grand venue. They moved with frightening lethal efficiency, spreading out across the expensive carpet. Their dark tactical jackets were prominently emblazoned with the stark yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They carried heavy-duty tactical gear and wore expressions of absolute merciless focus. The remaining high society guests shrank back against the walls, clearing a wide, unobstructed path down the central aisle of the ballroom. The agents did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. They did not pause to assess the crowd or ask for directions. They did not even look in my direction as they rapidly advanced. They marched straight past me, treating me as nothing more than a ghost in the complex machinery of their highly coordinated operation. The lead FBI agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern, hardened face, marched directly up the stairs and onto the main stage. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his torn tuxedo jacket, spinning him around and violently slamming him against the dark velvet curtains. Marcus shrieked in absolute terror as the agent kicked his legs apart and aggressively patted him down for concealed weapons. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and federal money laundering," the agent barked, his voice booming across the silent room. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around Marcus's wrists echoed loudly through the cavernous space. A second highly coordinated team of IRS agents swarmed Jamal, yanking the golden child to his feet, ignoring the fresh blood dripping from his chin. Jamal offered no physical resistance whatsoever to the federal authorities. He simply held his hands out, his spirit completely broken, as cold steel snapped securely around his wrists. Down on the main floor, two female FBI agents cornered Chloe. She tried to run, but they grabbed her arms forcefully, twisting them behind her back. Chloe shrieked wildly as the steel locked her hands together. Reginald watched completely powerless, as the glorious family facade was entirely annihilated, replaced by the humiliating reality of federal steel chains. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom stood wide open as the federal agents began the grueling, deeply humiliating perp walk right through the center of the Ritz-Carlton. The flashing red and blue lights from the armada of police cruisers parked outside illuminated the main aisle, creating a harsh, unforgiving runway for Atlanta's disgraced elite. The remaining venture capitalists, high society socialites, and city officials, who had previously worshipped at the altar of the Addams family empire, now pressed themselves against the walls in absolute disgust. They pulled out their smartphones, recording every agonizing second of the monumental downfall. The whispered gossip that usually fueled these elite gatherings transformed into audible hisses of judgment and outright condemnation. Jamal was marched out first. The arrogant golden child, the man who believed he was destined to rule the city's real estate market, was now shuffling forward with his head hung low. His tailored custom tuxedo was violently ripped and heavily stained with blood from his brawl on the stage. He did not make eye contact with anyone, completely broken under the crushing weight of his obliterated ego. Reginald and Vivian stood by the VIP ropes, completely paralyzed, watching their son being paraded like a common criminal. Chloe followed closely behind him, flanked by two stern female agents. Her desperate attempt to blend into the crowd had failed spectacularly. Her expensive designer gown was twisted, her carefully styled hair completely ruined, and her face streaked with running black mascara. The elite crowd parted for her, not out of respect but out of visceral revulsion. The woman who had spent months parading around as the ultimate prize, the perfect future wife of a dynasty, was now exposed as a calculating, pathetic thief being dragged out in front of the entire city. Then came Marcus. The brilliant tech visionary who had built his entire identity on the illusion of unparalleled intellect and untouchable superiority was violently resisting the agents guiding him down the stairs of the shattered stage. His face was badly bruised, his collar torn, and his eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for a savior who did not exist. As the federal agents forcefully marched him past the velvet rope of the VIP section, where I stood watching with cold detachment, he completely snapped. The last remaining shred of his fabricated dignity evaporated into the cold air of the ballroom. Marcus abruptly threw his entire weight forward, collapsing heavily onto his knees right in front of me. The sudden drop caught the federal agents off guard, forcing them to halt their march. The polished floorboards echoed with the dull thud of his kneecaps hitting the wood. He gazed up at me, his face a grotesque mask of pure, unadulterated panic and pathetic desperation. Tears streamed down his bruised cheeks, mixing with the blood from his split lip. "Please!" he begged, his voice cracking loudly, carrying across the dead silence of the watchful crowd. "Please, Nia, do not let them do this to me. You are a billionaire. You have the money. You can pay the bail. You can hire the best defense lawyers in the country and make all of this go away right now. I am your husband. I love you. We can fix this together. Just please help me. Help." His pathetic plea hung in the air, a putrid display of his endless toxic entitlement. Even now, with federal handcuffs binding his wrists and his mistress being hauled out the door ahead of him, he honestly believed he could manipulate my emotions. He thought my massive wealth was a safety net he could simply command. He truly believed the word love was a magic spell that would instantly erase months of his calculated betrayal, corporate theft, and relentless public humiliation. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I moved with slow, deliberate precision, ensuring every single eye in the room was fixed firmly on my next move. The heavy silk of my designer gown rustled softly as I gracefully crouched down, bringing my face completely level with his. I looked directly into his red-rimmed, terrified eyes. The close proximity forced him to see the absolute void of sympathy in my gaze. The FBI agent stood silently above us, allowing this brief interaction, fully aware that my meticulous cooperation was the only reason they possessed this airtight case. "You spent our entire marriage reminding me of my place," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal whisper that only he and the agents could hear. "You constantly told me I was a failure because I did not have a degree. You mocked my background to your friends. You laughed at my lack of formal education, while you paraded your fake brilliance around the city. You thought I was too stupid to understand your offshore accounts, too blind to see your sloppy theft, and too weak to fight back against your manipulation." Marcus let out a ragged, desperate sob, shaking his head weakly as the brutal reality of my words crushed the last of his hope. "Turns out I do have an education," I continued, my tone devoid of any mercy. "I have a PhD in destroying arrogant men, and your defense was pathetic." I stood up slowly, towering over the kneeling man who had once believed he owned my entire existence. I reached into the sleek clutch hanging from my wrist and pulled out a thick, perfectly folded legal document. My lead corporate attorney stepped out from the shadows of the VIP section, holding a heavy gold fountain pen. I took the pen and looked back down at the ruined tech CEO. I crouched back down one final time. I held the legal document directly in front of his face. The bold black letters at the top clearly stated it was a finalized absolute decree of divorce, stripping him of any claim to my assets, my companies, or my newly acquired billion-dollar empire. I slid the heavy gold pen directly into his restricted, handcuffed hands. His bloody, bruised fingers fumbled awkwardly against the cold metal. "Sign the divorce papers, Marcus," I commanded, my voice echoing with icy, absolute finality. "Sign them right now, relinquishing every single claim you think you have. Or I will gladly make sure the federal prosecutor adds the last 5 years of your hidden corporate tax evasion to your current charges. I have the secondary ledgers, Marcus. I have the deleted emails. If you hesitate for even 1 second, I will hand them over and ensure you never see the outside of a federal penitentiary again." Marcus stared at the papers, his chest heaving with violent, racking sobs. The illusion of his power was completely dead. He was cornered, trapped, and entirely at my mercy. With his hands bound by federal steel and tears blinding his vision, he awkwardly gripped the gold pen. He dragged the nib across the signature line, leaving a jagged, desperate scrawl at the bottom of the page. He sobbed uncontrollably as he signed away his marriage, his wealth, and his final remaining connection to power. I snatched the document back from his trembling hands and handed it securely to my attorney. I looked up at the federal agents and gave them a single dismissive nod. The agents yanked Marcus to his feet by his armpits, ignoring his loud, pathetic wailing. They dragged him down the aisle, his highly polished shoes dragging uselessly against the expensive carpet. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, plunging the ballroom into a profound, deafening silence. The morning sun aggressively pierced through the glass windows of my massive corner office, illuminating the sleek minimalist furniture and the sprawling Atlanta skyline below. It was a brand new day, and the city was currently waking up to the most spectacular corporate massacre in its modern history. I stood near the polished mahogany desk, sipping a cup of black coffee while watching the muted flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. The local and national news networks were running continuous, unbroken coverage of the previous night. High-definition footage played on an endless loop showing Marcus and Jamal being forcefully shoved into the back of federal vehicles. The bold, scrolling text at the bottom of the screen detailed the staggering magnitude of their combined crimes: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering. The financial analysts on the morning shows were already enthusiastically dissecting the absolute overnight obliteration of the Addams family real estate empire and the total collapse of Marcus's highly inflated tech firm. The elite social circles that had worshipped them just 12 hours ago were now entirely focused on distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. It was a complete systematic annihilation of everything they held dear. I felt a profound sense of absolute peace settle deep into my bones. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since my childhood was finally gone, completely erased by the undeniable reality of my triumph. The soft chime of my private intercom broke the quiet sanctuary of my office. My executive assistant spoke, her tone carrying a distinct edge of professional hesitation. "Ms. Nia, your parents are down in the main lobby. They are demanding to see you, and security is asking how you would like to proceed." I slowly lowered my coffee cup, a cold, highly calculated smile forming on my face. "Let them up," I instructed, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotional attachment. "Security will escort them up." A few moments later, the frosted glass doors slid open, and two of my armed guards walked in, flanking the two people who had once treated me like a worthless, disposable burden. The transformation was absolutely breathtaking. Reginald and Vivian Adams looked as though they aged a full decade overnight. The arrogant, untouchable country club superiority that usually radiated from their pores had been completely stripped away, leaving behind two hollow, terrified husks of human beings. Vivian was no longer draped in expensive designer silk or covered in sparkling diamonds. She wore a simple, wrinkled trench coat over a hastily chosen outfit, her hair disheveled and her eyes swollen from hours of unchecked crying. Reginald looked utterly broken, his shoulders slumped and his hands trembling violently at his sides. The commanding, patriarchal aura he had weaponized against me for my entire life was entirely gone. They stood awkwardly on the plush carpet of my pristine corporate fortress, realizing they were completely at the mercy of the daughter they had relentlessly discarded. Vivian took a hesitant, shaky step forward, completely ignoring the strict physical boundary maintained by my security team. She looked at me with wild, desperate eyes, searching frantically for the compliant, obedient girl who used to crave her affection. "We lost everything," Nia, she whimpered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her new reality. "The federal agents seized the company accounts this morning. The bank executed the emergency clauses on the loans. They took the house, Nia. They changed the locks on our home before the sun even came up. We have absolutely nothing left." She clasped her trembling hands together, raising them to her chest in a pathetic display of submission. "Jamal is facing 10 years in federal prison. They denied his bail because he is a flight risk. The syndicate is threatening us." Reginald stepped forward, his face a mask of pure agony. His voice was a weak, raspy shadow of its former self. "You have to help us," he pleaded, abandoning any remaining shred of his pride. "You are the only one with the resources to fix this. You have billions. You can hire the lawyers. You can pay off the debts. Please, Nia." Vivian fell to her knees, weeping loudly into her hands. "You are our daughter, Nia. We are your family. You have to save us. Please do not let them destroy your brother. We will do anything you want." I stared at the weeping woman on my floor and the broken man beside her. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no sense of familial obligation. Their sudden desperation for my existence was entirely transactional, born solely from their own horrific consequences. I slowly walked around my massive desk, my heels sinking into the carpet, and pulled open the top drawer. I reached inside and retrieved a single crisp item. I walked over to Vivian and crouched down, maintaining eye contact with my mother, just as I had done with Marcus the night before. I held out my hand and dropped a single $100 bill onto the floor right in front of her tear-stained face. The vibrant green paper rested against the dark fabric of the rug. Vivian stopped crying, her eyes darting from the money to my cold, unforgiving gaze. Reginald stared at the bill in absolute stunned silence. "This is exactly what you gave me when you kicked me out of the house at 19. I stated, my voice carrying the lethal, chilling precision of a judge delivering a final verdict. "You handed me a bill and told me I was a worthless embarrassment who would never survive in the real world. You threw me to the wolves and expected me to die." I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my tailored suit. "Consider my debt paid." I turned my back on them and walked to my desk, pressing the security button on my console. "Security," I ordered firmly, completely ignoring Vivian's renewed hysterical screaming. "Escort these strangers out of my building immediately." 6 months passed. The blistering heat of an Atlanta summer had finally broken, giving way to a crisp autumn chill. The relentless news cycle had eventually moved on to fresh scandals, but the absolute destruction of the Adams real estate empire remained a legendary cautionary tale whispered in corporate boardrooms across the city. I stepped out of my armored town car, adjusting the lapels of my impeccably tailored charcoal suit. The heavy glass doors of a busy mid-tier diner swung open, releasing a thick, suffocating wave of stale coffee and greasy fried food. It was a massive, sharp descent from the crystal chandeliers and velvet ropes of the Ritz-Carlton, but this particular location held a very specific, undeniable appeal for my lunch hour. The morning rush was in full swing. Plates clattered loudly against formica tables, and hurried waitresses navigated narrow aisles, carrying heavy plastic trays loaded with cheap diner food. I walked gracefully through the chaotic environment, my expensive leather heels clicking rhythmically against the scuffed linoleum floor. I slid into a cracked red vinyl booth near the back corner, specifically requesting this exact section from the bewildered hostess at the front register. I rested my designer briefcase on the sticky tabletop and waited with a calm, patient smile. A waitress approached my table, her head down as she hurriedly wiped her hands on a stained brown apron. It was Chloe. The transformation was nothing short of staggering. The woman who had once draped herself in stolen diamonds and paraded through elite galas like a conquering queen was now completely unrecognizable. Her expensive highlights had faded into a dull, mousy brown, hastily pulled back into a severe, practical ponytail. The heavy designer makeup was entirely gone, revealing dark, exhausted circles beneath her eyes, and the pale, sallow skin of someone drowning in relentless stress. She wore a cheap polyester uniform that was slightly too large, and her posture screamed of aching feet and profound physical defeat. She pulled a crumpled order pad from her pocket and finally looked up. The tiny, forced customer service smile instantly vanished from her face. She froze, completely paralyzed, staring at me as if I were a terrifying ghost summoned directly from her darkest nightmares. The color rapidly drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking violently ill. I simply looked back at her, my expression completely serene and utterly unbothered. "Are you going to take my order, Chloe?" I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly polite, carrying effortlessly over the loud clatter of the busy diner. She swallowed hard, her knuckles turning stark white as she gripped her cheap plastic pen. She desperately tried to summon the old, haughty arrogance that had once defined her entire existence. She lifted her chin, attempting to look down her nose at me, despite currently wearing a grease-stained apron. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a harsh, trembling whisper. "Did you just come here to gloat? Have you not done enough to me already? My accounts are frozen. I am drowning in legal fees." I am working double shifts just to make rent in a terrible neighborhood. You already won. I did not react to her pathetic attempt at playing the victim. I simply picked up the sticky laminated menu and opened it. I will have a black coffee and the grilled chicken sandwich, I stated calmly, ignoring her dramatic outburst entirely. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red. She opened her mouth, preparing to deliver a scathing, bitter remark when a loud, booming voice echoed across the diner floor. Chloe, what are you doing just standing there? A heavy-set manager with a stained shirt yelled from the kitchen pass. Table 4 has been waiting for 10 minutes. Stop gossiping and get the lady her water right now. We have a lunch rush to survive. Do your job or punch out and do not come back. The last pathetic remnant of Chloe's false superiority shattered instantly into a million pieces. The harsh reality of her new life slammed into her with brutal, unforgiving force. She flinched violently at the manager's loud reprimand, her shoulders instantly slumping in defeat. She could not afford to lose this job. She could not afford to fight back. She was completely and utterly trapped. She closed her eyes for a brief, agonizing second, taking a shaky breath before she blindly reached for the plastic water pitcher resting on her service tray. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she leaned over my table. She poured the ice water into my clear plastic cup, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. A small splash of water spilled onto the table. I watched her wipe it up with a cheap paper napkin, her head bowed in absolute profound humiliation. She did not say another word as she scribbled my order on her pad and practically fled toward the kitchen, retreating into the loud chaos of the busy diner. I sat quietly and ate my $20 meal when it arrived. I watched her navigate the dining room, getting yelled at by impatient customers and continuously barked at by her demanding manager. She dropped a plate of fries and had to clean it up on her hands and knees while people stepped around her. It was a miserable, soul-crushing existence, and it was exactly the life she had meticulously earned for herself. When I finished my coffee, I reached into the breast pocket of my tailored suit. I pulled out a thick banded stack of crisp $100 bills. I dropped the money onto the center of the table right next to the empty plate. $5,000 in untraceable cash. I took a pen from my pocket and wrote a short message on the back of the receipt before sliding it securely under the stack of money. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the diner without looking back. Through the large plate glass window, I paused just long enough to watch Chloe approach my empty booth. I watched her eyes lock onto the massive stack of green bills. I watched her hands shake as she slowly reached out and picked up the receipt, reading the handwritten note. Use this to buy a decent lawyer for your husband. Oh wait, you cheated on him. Chloe dropped the paper as if it had burned her skin. She collapsed into the vinyl booth, covering her face with her hands, and burst into loud, uncontrollable tears of absolute profound humiliation while the busy diner continued to rage indifferently around her. Miles away from the greasy diner, the harsh, unforgiving reality of federal justice was actively grinding Marcus and Jamal into dust. The towering concrete walls and razor wire fences of the federal penitentiary had permanently replaced their penthouse suites and corner offices. Marcus, the self-proclaimed visionary genius of the technology world, now spent his days scrubbing stainless steel toilets in the prison laundry facility. His custom-tailored designer suits had been violently traded for a stiff, brightly colored orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his rapidly shrinking frame. He no longer commanded corporate boardrooms or manipulated wealthy venture capitalists with a charismatic smile. He simply followed the barking, echoing orders of heavily armed guards. His brilliant, calculating mind was entirely consumed by the crushing monotony of his rigid daily schedule and the terrifying realization that he had 10 long, agonizing years left to serve. The miserable fluorescent lighting of the cell block offered no place to hide from his complete failure. Jamal, the former golden child of Atlanta real estate, fared absolutely no better in his new environment. The arrogant man who had once glided through elite galas with unearned confidence was now confined to a tiny windowless cell that smelled permanently of bleach and despair. His expensive daily grooming routine was completely gone, leaving him looking haggard, exhausted, and prematurely aged. The brutal prison hierarchy did not care about his family name, his former bank account, or his previous social standing. Without his stolen wealth and his parents' influence to shield him, Jamal was exposed as a weak, frightened man entirely incapable of surviving the harsh reality of his incarceration. He ate flavorless food from a plastic tray and slept on a thin, lumpy mattress staring at a concrete ceiling. Every single day was a masterclass in profound, relentless humiliation. The total destruction of the Adams family extended far beyond the bleak prison walls, systematically dismantling the lives of the parents who had proudly orchestrated my suffering. Reginald, the former patriarch who had ruled his corporate empire with an iron fist, now stood near the automatic sliding doors of a massive discount hardware store in the suburbs. The man who used to terrorize board members now wore a cheap, brightly colored polyester vest, completely covering his faded polo shirt. He spent his grueling 8-hour shifts handing out damp sanitizing wipes and directing busy, impatient contractors toward the plumbing aisle. His back ached constantly from standing on the unforgiving concrete floor, and he was forced to take humiliating orders from a store manager who was barely 22 years old. The ultimate crushing blow to his fragile ego occurred weekly, whenever a former colleague or country club acquaintance walked through the automatic sliding doors. Reginald would immediately drop his gaze, staring intensely at the scuffed linoleum floor, desperately praying to remain unrecognized. But the cruel whispers always followed him down the aisles. The total obliteration of his power was absolute. He was a pathetic cautionary tale, a ghost haunting the very city he once believed he owned completely. Across town, Vivian was experiencing her own personalized version of psychological hell. She sat entirely alone at a scratched laminate table inside a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and old carpet. The sprawling manicured lawns of her former gated estate were replaced by a depressing view of a cracked asphalt parking lot and an overflowing dumpster. The profound isolation she experienced was deafening. The wealthy women she had spent decades attempting to impress the elite circle of socialites she valued far above her own daughter had instantly blocked her phone number the morning the federal indictments were unsealed on the local news. Vivian slowly turned the pages of a heavy leather-bound photo album, her hands trembling violently as she traced the glossy images of past charity galas and exclusive country club dinners. She stared at the smiling faces of people who now pretended she was completely dead. The social standing she had worshipped and protected with ruthless cruelty had vanished like smoke in the wind. She had traded her daughter for a fragile illusion, and now she was left with absolutely nothing but the crushing, suffocating silence of her tiny apartment. While they suffocated under the heavy weight of their own consequences, my life accelerated into a brilliant, unparalleled stratosphere of success. The crisp autumn air buzzed with electric excitement as I stood on a massive raised stage in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Behind me towered a beautiful state-of-the-art glass and steel architectural marvel. It was the grand opening of a massive new community center specifically designed to fund, educate, and elevate young Black women entering the competitive technology and business sectors. I had poured millions of dollars into ensuring the facility possessed the absolute finest resources available. The massive crowd stretching across the outdoor plaza numbered in the thousands. I wore a sharp, tailored emerald green suit that commanded the space, projecting absolute power and undeniable grace. The mayor of Atlanta stood directly to my right, beaming with genuine pride as he handed me a pair of oversized, ceremonial golden scissors. Flashbulbs from dozens of prominent media outlets strobed continuously, capturing the monumental, historic event. I stepped forward and cleanly snipped the wide red ribbon, triggering a deafening roar of applause and a massive shower of bright biodegradable confetti. The media press junket immediately surged forward, thrusting microphones and recording devices toward the edge of the stage. A prominent national journalist, holding a microphone bearing the logo of a major financial network, caught my attention. "Ms. Nia," she called out, her voice rising clearly above the cheering crowd. "You have completely transformed the corporate landscape of this city in under a year. You are funding startups, building community centers, and redefining wealth. What exactly inspired you to build this massive empire?" I stepped up to the edge of the stage, looking directly into the primary broadcast camera. The lens perfectly captured my unwavering, absolute confidence. Someone once told me I did not fit the image of success. I stated, my voice resonating with cool, undeniable authority through the massive speakers. So I decided to buy the image and completely redesign it. The sprawling penthouse living room was completely silent, save for the faint, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning and the distant, muffled sounds of the Atlanta traffic far below. The heavy mahogany double doors, the pristine white marble floors, and the towering floor-to-ceiling windows all looked exactly as they had months ago when this entire ordeal began. Back then, this room had felt like a suffocating, highly decorated prison cell. It was the exact spot where Marcus used to pace back and forth, shouting into his phone about his fabricated corporate acquisitions, while I sat quietly in the corner, completely invisible to the man who claimed to love me. It was the same room where Vivian and Reginald had sneered at my furniture choices, calling them entirely uninspired and severely lacking in proper high society pedigree. Tonight, however, the energy in the massive space was fundamentally different. The toxic, suffocating, heavy atmosphere had been entirely flushed out, replaced by the crisp, clean air of absolute total victory. I walked slowly across the cold marble floor, my bare feet making no sound at all. I had traded my sharp emerald green corporate suit for a flowing, comfortable silk robe that trailed elegantly behind me. I felt completely, entirely weightless. I approached the heavy crystal bar cart positioned perfectly in front of the massive panoramic view of the glowing city skyline. The city looked beautiful tonight, a vast, glittering ocean of neon lights and endless possibilities. I reached out and grabbed a chilled, heavy green bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, resting in a silver ice bucket. I smoothly untwisted the wire cage and firmly gripped the cork. It popped with a sharp, deeply satisfying crack that echoed loudly through the cavernous living room. I tilted a tall, slender crystal flute and poured the golden, bubbling liquid, watching the heavy foam rise to the very rim. The expensive champagne smelled like toasted brioche and crisp green apples. I set the heavy bottle down and picked up the delicate crystal glass, feeling the cool moisture against my warm fingertips. I turned around slowly, moving with deliberate, unhurried grace. I looked directly forward, staring right into the lens of the camera, tracking my every single movement. For my entire life, I existed purely as a convenient background character in the grand theatrical production of the Addams family dynasty. I was the designated scapegoat, the acceptable target for their endless, misplaced frustrations and their deep-seated, agonizing insecurities. Reginald needed a failure to highlight his own fabricated brilliance. Vivian desperately needed a massive disappointment to make her golden child, Jamal, look like a flawless, absolute messiah. Marcus, my incredibly arrogant, treacherous husband, needed a quiet, submissive partner to mask his own staggering corporate incompetence and his relentless, hollow vanity. They all operated together, functioning as a highly coordinated, toxic machine designed specifically to keep me crushed beneath the heavy weight of their impossibly high bougie standards. They demanded total compliance. They expected silent, unwavering obedience. They honestly believed that if they insulted my intelligence long enough, if they mocked my quiet demeanor loudly enough, I would eventually just accept my assigned role as the pathetic, unremarkable loser of the family. They could not have been more completely and utterly wrong. I took a wonderfully slow, deliberate sip of the exquisitely expensive champagne, letting the crisp, cold liquid slide down my throat. The taste of absolute victory was profoundly sweet. They spent decades underestimating my silence. They mistook my patient observation for dull submission. They thought because I was quiet, I was weak. They thought because I didn't conform to their toxic bougie standards, I was a failure. But while they were busy playing dress-up, I was buying the board game. While they were maxing out fraudulent credit cards to lease exotic sports cars and buy fake friends at the country club, I was quietly, aggressively acquiring the very institutions they relied upon to survive. I was analyzing the corporate ledgers, tracking the offshore accounts, and silently purchasing the commercial debt that held their entire fragile empire together. They spent all their time desperately trying to look wealthy, while I spent my time actually becoming untouchable. The profound absolute irony of the situation is that they handed me the exact blueprints to their own destruction. Every time Marcus bragged about a shady real estate deal, every time Jamal sneered about a highly leveraged loan, every single time Reginald boasted about bribing a city official, they were literally handing me the ammunition I needed to completely annihilate them. They were so blinded by their own towering narcissism, they never once stopped to consider that the quiet woman sitting in the corner was meticulously cataloging every single word. I did not just defeat them, I completely dismantled their entire reality. I erased their power, their money, their freedom, and their highly prized social standing. I took the very things they valued above my own life and turned them into dust. Now I stand here completely alone in this massive, beautiful penthouse, and I have truly never felt more incredibly deeply alive. The community center I opened today is just the very beginning. I am actively using the immense wealth I stripped from their corrupt, greedy hands to build an empire based on genuine empowerment instead of toxic, relentless exploitation. I am funding the dreams of young, brilliant women who are told every single day that they do not fit the traditional image of success. I am rewriting the rules of the game entirely. I took another sip of the champagne, the sparkling bubbles dancing against my lips. I stepped closer to the camera, holding the crystal flute up high in a silent, solitary toast. The sparkling lights of the Atlanta skyline reflected brightly in the golden liquid. Family is supposed to be your safe haven. But when they build a house of cards on top of your back, sometimes you just have to be the hurricane.